Megan, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
So great to talk to you today. For those listening, Megan is an ambassador of the Miracle Babies Foundation, which is Australia's leading organisation supporting premature and sick newborns, their families, and the hospitals that care for them. And together with her wife Jess, they are parents to a beautiful girl, Rylee, who was born at 28 weeks via emergency C section. And Megan is an Australian fast bowler who's played for the national team and even played in a number of as part of the Ashes team several times too. You are overseas at the moment, Megan. Where are you?
I'm actually just interstate, but
Oh,
I'm currently
interstate.
in Brisbane. But we
Okay.
are, yeah, it's a pretty quick tour, this one. We're hopping in and out of cities pretty quickly. So,
Yeah, okay.
nice to be home, to be honest.
Yeah, right. No, so good. Oh, sorry, it's just frozen. Nope, all good. Yeah, that's so good. And so, how long a stint do you do when you're away?
It really differs. So something like this is a really short one, so it'll only be 2.5 weeks.
Yeah.
But if it is an Ashes series, it's often about 6 weeks. And then we often go back-to-back tours. So we did have a period of 3 tours in a row where I was away for about 11 weeks, which obviously is
Wow.
quite hard with Rylee, and Jess does a lot of solo parenting, bless her. So
Yeah.
it's a tough gig, but yeah, not for too much longer, I guess.
Yeah. Have they been able to sort of join you at any point, or is it just too difficult because you're working?
They've joined at some locations. There's some places I don't really want to take Rylee, especially overseas.
Yeah.
She's a 2-year-old. She, licks everything, eats everything off the floor. So
Yeah.
lots of locations I don't really want her to come. But it
Yeah.
is really tough when we travel so much, and it's pretty stressful for all of us.
Yeah. Do you have family support at home?
Yeah, we're super lucky that Jess's parents happen to live around the corner,
Oh, that's
which is good
great.
and bad.
Yes.
But geez, we'd be so lost without them. So
Yeah.
we're very lucky to have a lot of support from them.
Yeah, honestly, hands up to, hat goes off to all of those single parents, specifically single parents and who do not have the support. I do not know how you could do it. Like,
Yeah.
it's not an easy gig, this parenting gig. So today I'd love to talk about your experience right up to having Rylee, and obviously she was a little preemie and sort of the experience that you had with that. But I guess to set the context, first and foremost, I mean, you're an advocate for the LGBTQ community. You met Jess at Cricket Australia. You got engaged, and 2 years later, when same sex marriage was legalised, you got married, and then you had your beautiful daughter, Rylee. So, did you always know you wanted to be a parent?
No, I didn't. Jess definitely, that was her nurturing soul. She's known her whole life she's going to be a mum. That's yeah, her caring nature, and I was always up in air about it. I didn't really think about it too much, and never didn't want kids, but never was through it about them either. And then yeah, things changed once I met Jess, and obviously saw our life together, and what we could do, and that grew and grew. And yeah, one day we were like, let's do this, let's get on board. So obviously it's quite a long process in a same sex relationship, and one that we had to start probably a few years in, to be honest, just even having the conversations to make sure we're on the same page. And yeah, we got there.
Yeah, so what does that look like then? I mean, obviously, you said that there's a fair bit to organise even in the lead up. What did your IVF journey sort of look like? And I say that as well for other same sex couples sort of listening in, going, okay, so where do I even start?
That's probably the hardest part, is picking a fertility clinic. We did a bit of research in South Australia, wanting to make sure that, we were going to get really good care, and feel like we weren't just a burden in a way. And we came across Repromed, which is a South Australian company. And that was really the first step, was just booking in with a doctor there and seeing what the journey was going to look like, and just knowing what was going to be involved, how long are things going to take, and what are the choices we're going to make along the way. So that was probably the first step, was booking in with them, and they came across us and said, well, you actually need to pass a counselling session. Everyone does, to access donor sperm. And so we ticked that off, and once we had done that, it was really a conversation of who was going to carry, how are we going to do the egg situation, what donor were we going to go with, and there were quite a few options, to be honest, which was a little overwhelming at the time. But we had a very good idea of, since I play professional sport, I definitely wasn't going to be carrying the first child, and Jess really wanted to, so it was the perfect mix. And then it was choosing the donor sperm, which that was probably the longest process of the lot.
What does that even look like? How do they present you your options? Yeah.
Yeah, it's very different. So it's different in every single state. Everyone has different legislation, which makes it even more complicated. But for Repromed specifically, it was you could either choose South Australian donors, which we were never going to do because it's an extremely small city. Everyone knows everyone, and it would just be a bit odd. Or overseas. So this was through California Cryobank. They have a connection with, and it becomes literally like a catalog. So once we logged onto the website and we had access literally via membership, it was you could choose anything and everything, and there was detail. We even got to hear the donor's voice if we wanted to. They could upload adult photos. We knew what the donor's grandmother did for occupation, their health and history. Like it was an overwhelming amount of information, but also really cool. You feel like you really know them, and that was the hardest part, was with time difference, and obviously it's a different donor system over there where they're paid, so the donor actually rolls through really quickly, and so we had to figure out how much sperm we're going to need to potentially, if we wanted to get 3 kids, if they don't top up and we don't get enough, then biologically they'll be different, so we wanted to make sure we could get a large amount of sperm. And I reckon we didn't get our first top 5 donors. They ran out. They went through the door really quick.
Wow.
And with time difference with emails and trying to get in touch with them, it was a very long process, and then also a very expensive one. Per vial, I think it was $1,000, and then $700 for shipping. And so it was making sure we were clear with our appointments with our doctor how many vials we might potentially need. But all of that's the unknown. We could have 10 failed attempts and churn through all that. So yeah, that was an overwhelming process, and just trying to, I guess you're essentially choosing, the half your kid in a way. So it's you really want to make sure you've nailed that down, and that was probably the longest process of a lot of it.
How long did it take for you to bed down your donor?
At least 9 months, probably longer.
Wow.
Yeah, we were on there most nights on the internet, just looking at different donors, and also they had to be genetically tested to make sure they match Australian standards. So there's only a certain few, I guess, that would qualify for that. And those were the ones that happened to run out the door really quick. So obviously, I think it would have been a little bit different had we chosen Australian sperm, but that's not how Repromed, well, our fertility clinic works. So we were really happy to go down this route.
And what was the first round of IVF like? Were you successful? Talk us through the process.
Yeah, we were super lucky. So Jess and I did reciprocal IVF. So Rylee is technically my egg. So we were waiting for a good time in my schedule to retrieve my eggs, which there wasn't one. So we just ended up doing it and missed a little bit of cricket, but not much. And retrieved I think it was something like 27 eggs. We were super lucky, got a whole heap of eggs. And we had the sperm arrive not long before, and we ended up getting 9 embryos out of that, which was bloody amazing. And we were stoked. And then we just went in for an appointment with our doctor to go through that process and say, hey, this is how it's been successful. And he asked, he's like, when are you guys going to try? And we're like, we've got these tournaments coming up, we've got this. And he's like, just give it a crack this month. And kind of pushed us into it. And we were like, yeah, you know what, chances of getting a first chance are super slim. And we did. We got a first go. So I think it was from that conversation to the call of you're pregnant, I think it was maybe 3 or 4 weeks.
Oh, wow.
And so our world had flipped very quickly in the best of ways. I'm really glad that he did that, because there is no perfect time.
Yep.
And who knows how long we would have been umming and ahhing about it. So yeah, that whole process actually was really quick. We were lucky that the transfer was successful straight away. So the start to the pregnancy was actually really smooth.
Yeah. So let's talk about the pregnancy then. So the first 12 weeks, obviously such a precarious time for all of us parents, right? You're like, I don't want to get my hopes up, but I'm kind of really excited, but I'm trying not to think about it, but I'm thinking about it all the time. So what was that like for you?
Really stressful. So Jess and I are polar opposites in our personality in terms of how much we worry. I'm very free-flowing. I believe in fate, it'll take care of itself, and Jess worries about every minute detail in life, and I guess we balance well. So the first 12 weeks was stressful for both of us, but I think I spent my time just calming her down, going, you have done everything right. You've followed everything to the book. If anything happens, it's not your fault and it is fate and we'll try again. So the first 12 weeks were stressful and just, just making sure it's stuck. And, we've had lots of friends who have had miscarriages, and, you're obviously paying lots of money and you don't want to repeat a lot of processes. And so there's lots of added stress, I guess, than just your usual heterosexual relationship in a way. So it was a bit of the unknown, lots of changes obviously going through Jess's body, a lot of hormonal changes, so a few more mood swings than I was probably used to with Jess, which is quite funny. I actually quite enjoyed it. It was a bit different. And yeah, it was pretty good. It was pretty smooth. We had some good appointments. We had a fantastic OB, and it wasn't really till the 10-week that we did the nest test or harmony test and could find out the sex, which was really cool, because at the start of the, we were like, no, let's do a surprise. We want to, how often do we get this surprise? And then as soon as the opportunity popped up to know, we took it. Like, it was a 180 flip in a split second of like, yeah, let's find out so we can plan. Yes. Like, I'm a very structured human being. And I like to be able to do things in a certain way. So we both, changed our mind very quickly. And then, just some tests came back at the 12 weeks of low pape, and they said, she's going to be a small baby, but both Jess and I were small babies, so we weren't really phased at all, and just had to go on aspirin for the remainder of the pregnancy. And it wasn't until later on that things started to develop, I guess.
At what point did things sort of start shifting for you?
Yeah, I think it was the 20-week scan. Jess had something wrong with her cervix, basically, which they were a little bit concerned, but they seemed pretty calm about it. And I'm someone who asks a million questions when I'm in a doctor's room. I like to know every process, and I was just reading the room and it didn't seem too bad. And I was like, okay, we're cool. There might be a few little complications, and we already know with IVF babies they're probably going to come early anyway, so we'd kind of mentally semi-prepped to an extent for that. And we're like, cool, keep going. And then when we came back for the 24-week scan, since we're doing added scans, since there were a few red flags I wanted to keep an eye on, she had barely grown. And suddenly all the monitors were saying under 1% for every measurement. And as I said, I'm someone who asks questions and reads the screens, and that is not Jess, because she doesn't like what she's going to see. And she could tell by my reaction and what I was reading on the screen that things weren't going well. And they just kept remeasuring. The sonographer went and got someone else. Their doctor kept remeasuring. And then they're like, yeah, she's barely grown. She's under the 1% for everything. There is something sinister going on here. We're going to keep a really close eye on you. So from there, it was weekly blood flow scans and fortnightly growth. And we had to monitor really closely her movements. And we're pretty lucky that Rylee was a very active baby. She was tiny, but she could kick very well. So it was just making sure we monitored that. And then, the Dopplers they'd be happy with, and then they wouldn't. So we'd come in for probably bi-weekly scans. And this went in and out for a while. And I think it was at 26 weeks, Jess was admitted into hospital they didn't like the Dopplers. They had given her some steroids at this point and said pretty much you'll be in here till the baby's born. And we're like, okay, don't know how long that's going to be. And then 2 days later, they liked the Dopplers and they let us go. So it was a quick tough around with that. And we're like, okay. And it's just changing of mindset. It was quite stressful, I guess. Yeah. And then I think it was about a week later, we'd just hit, I reckon, 27 weeks around then. She wasn't really kicking very much in the morning, and all the tricks we'd try to do of have orange juice and stuff that would normally get her going wasn't happening. So we were a bit concerned about, nah, let's go in. And they hooked her up to the CTG, and Rylee kind of had a couple D cells in her heart rate, and they said, look, we're not happy with this. We're gonna admit you again, and this time for real, you will be in here until you deliver. And we managed to squeeze out pretty much another week of just being hooked up to that CTG machine for hours a day, poor thing. And then I think it was a Tuesday morning, our OB came in and said, look, things look great today. How long's a piece of string? Go about, I'll be back tomorrow. And I was like, okay. So I went off and did training, finished my training. And as I was getting back in my car to go back to the hospital anyways, this is at about 6 or 7 p.m., Jess rang and was like, her first words were, they're doing it tonight. And I kind of was like, wait, what? And she's like, yep, there was an acceleration in her heart rate. She went over 200 for the first time. she's under stress. They're going to take her out. And I was like, okay, well, I'll be back at the hospital in 5 minutes anyways. I'm pretty lucky that Jess was in women's and children's, and where I train is pretty much Adelaide Oval across the road. So I said, like, I'll be back there in 5-10 minutes. Make sure they wait, sort of thing. And I got there, and we're packing up her bags for them to transfer Jess to the next room and get some drugs in to help with Rylee's lungs and her brain. And pretty much a couple of hours later, she was out. So it was all a very strange process. You'd think you're going calm, and then it would crash, and then it was stressful. But I guess for myself, I kind of put on a bit of a brave face and would pretend everything's okay, just because Jess is such a warrior that can't really afford both of us to be doing that. So now she was an absolute warrior, and I mean, she was always going to be the perfect mum, and it just turned out to not be the same journey that we'd predicted, I guess.
Throughout the pregnancy, what were the risks that the medical professionals were telling you? Were they saying, like, okay, there's a chance that this isn't going to affect, like, what were they giving you, sort of an idea of realistically what could happen?
I guess where we were really fortunate was Riley's always been very healthy. So
Okay.
throughout her development, she was small, but her organs were developing really well. And throughout no stage were they concerned with her health per se. So it was more so managing her growth rate and making sure she was getting the right blood flow. So that's what they were monitoring the most. And we were lucky to get steroids into Jess about 10 days before Rylee was born. So when she was born, she actually let out a little scream, which is not something they expect from a little 28-weeker, which was really cool. And so she was never actually on oxygen, which we were very lucky. So she was immediately put on to, the snorkel, Optiflow and all that kind of stuff, but was never actually on oxygen. She just needed some support so she could use her energy to grow, basically. So obviously when she was first born, they say, there's 1,000 complications that can happen in the first 24 hours. And that's probably the scariest part is you don't know how they're going to be once they come out. So for me, they just kind of said, look, this is the process. We're going to take her out. We will give you a few seconds with her. So we did kind of get like a little family photo. I got to cut the cords and do a few things, and then they whisked her off basically to get the IV drips in, to get everything in that they need to. So that I was never. As I said, I'd asked a million questions, so I felt pretty safe in where Rylee was at, and knew that there were certain risks, but pretty much once the first 24 hours had passed and they were stoked with how she was going and she wasn't on oxygen, I was like, she's already a little trooper, and she was just this string bean, so long and so skinny. You could see her heartbeat through her chest. She was that thin, like it was just, but she was healthy, and like that's all that mattered. They said, stop worrying about the weight, worry about the organ development, and her organs are great. So they were very reassuring, as well as making sure that we also knew the risks.
How big was she, like, when she came out? Like, as big as your hand, or how big?
Yeah, she was 31 centimeters and 858 grams.
Oh
So she
my
was
gosh.
pretty tiny.
Tiny.
Still a string bean in ways. Like she had these big flippers, big feet, which was ironic because the rest of her was tiny. And
Yeah.
the beanie they had knitted for her was like, when we saw it beforehand, we were like, that's when it was probably confronting. We saw this beanie and we were like, oh my God, that is going to fit on Riley's head. And so she was confrontingly skinny. Obviously, the skin at that stage is like very red and a little bit transparent, and you can really see the veins. And as I said, you could see her heartbeat. So it was confronting at the time. But she had opened her eyes when they'd taken her out, and done all these, like, ticked a lot of boxes that were really special. So it was an odd one.
I think about my pregnancy, and that entire time it's so precarious. Your body's changing. You already feel the nerves of, gosh, what's the birth going to be like? What's my baby going to be like? How's my life going to change? And all of those really sort of confronting feelings. I mean, how was Jess during the pregnancy? I mean, you say she's a warrior. Was she really kind of overwhelmed? Was she trying to stay grounded? What did that look like?
Oh, I reckon she went up and down. she had her bad days, don't get me wrong. Her days of extreme worry, and they probably came with the scans. So when they would reiterate how small she was and how much stress there was on Jess to make sure she could feel her movements. And I think that probably was the most stressful part, is Jess trying to learn what is normal. It's obviously our first pregnancy, and we don't really know what normal is already, and we're thrown into the deep end of having extra pressure on top. So um, I thought she was great considering the circumstances. So I think, second time round, I'm not sure how that would be, but um, she just chomped on with it. And I guess we made sure we ticked every box possible. We tried to keep it as realistic as we could. And as soon as we knew we were having an extreme prem, we were listening to podcasts and just trying to find out what we're in for, basically, and what the emotions are going to come with it. And we knew at the time we're going to be pretty overwhelmed, and you can plan as much as you want, but you're not going to know how you feel till that moment presents itself. So Jess was amazing, and I guess what was hard was it was a C-section, so obviously she's got a lot going on and in so much pain. And so for me, I was kind of lucky with we were public at the Women's and Children's because she was so early, and they let me stay the night purely because I was a female, which was great. Like if I was a male partner, I don't think I would have been snuck in a night. So was there to kind of be with her when she woke and look after her. And I guess what was truly confronting was how understaffed the hospital were as well, and knowing that if I wasn't there to help Jess shower, change her pads, and do all these things, that Jess wasn't going to be able to do those things and get down as easily to see Rylee. So yeah, as much as we were thinking of Rylee, I was thinking of Jess and making sure that if I could keep her okay, then everything else was going to be okay. And that was probably the hardest little section, was the first couple of weeks.
Yeah, because I mean, I just think when I've sort of given birth, having the baby, I was like, oh, I need the baby in eyesight at all times, sort of thing. Like, how did you cope with the baby not being with you?
Yeah, that was the hardest part, was leaving every night. So for the first, I think Jess got to stay for 5 or 6 nights. Our OB was fantastic in pushing to stay. They wanted her out within 3 nights, which was utterly ridiculous in my opinion,
Yeah.
especially after C-section. But we got to stay a little while, which meant that Jess could obviously go and see Rylee at any time. And if she wanted to, she woke up at 4 a.m. and wanted to see her, she could just go down a ward. And I think the hardest part was once Jess was released from hospital and suddenly we were both leaving Rylee overnight, and that was really hard. The first few nights, especially as I said, when it's the early days when you don't really know, and she was still in NICU at this point. And yeah, it was really overwhelming of just, we didn't know what we were going to feel, and just knowing she's alone and yeah, it doesn't have her mum's there, it was really scary. And I think yeah, we tried to make sure that, we would get some rest, but we're also up pretty early and would head straight to the hospital and make sure we're there for her cares, and make sure we got to do the special little things, not just hold her, but we did get to hold her pretty early. Like I think from the next day they were willing to let us hold her, which we didn't expect. So that was a wonderful surprise. And from there we just did a hell of a lot of kangaroo cuddles. Like it was pretty much constant. Either one of us had her, and obviously I still had to train. I got given 2 weeks off, so for 2 weeks I was in there all day with Jess, and then after that it was in and out a bit more. But considering the circumstances, we coped really well. We had a bit of a structure, a bit of a routine. It helped that, as I said, Adelaide was across the road from Women's and Children's, so I could just simply park our car in there. We'd walk up. So we got free parking. Like that is just something that like the nurses would stress about, because they would only get 2 hours, so they've got to go on their shift and move their car or get their ticket. So like something as simple as that was a big stress relief. So we were pretty lucky that so we were told to pretty much expect Rylee to be in till what 40 weeks would have been. That's the normal stay for an early child, and we ended up being in there just shy of 8 weeks. So we ended up getting her home at technically 36 weeks gestation, it would have been. So we were stoked. Rylee was just a little champ, and yeah, we're very lucky.
Was there any sort of, I mean, you think about things like postnatal depression and things like that, which is very, very common. And I feel as though perhaps, experiencing something like you guys did, you'd be sort of more at high risk of those sort of, mental health challenges. Was there anything that yourself or Jess faced following the birth from a mental health perspective that you had to sort of tackle?
Yeah, definitely. I think Jess suffered a lot of P&D. I think that was, I think she was always going to be at risk with that. It runs in the family, and obviously our situation not being the best, it was always going to be a factor, and it definitely was. And I remember we had conversations later on, like way later on, of how Jess felt guilty about she didn't feel a connection with Rylee straight away. Was that because she was preemie? Was that because it was my egg? Like there's lots of things that just go into your mind, and you go, is this actually helping me, and where are we at? And we probably weren't honest with each other with that early days because we were just trying to battle each day as we went. I certainly wasn't honest and was just trying to put on a brave face, and that's what I've done my whole life. I've never been a crier, and it's a bad issue. This is what I'm working on, working on it. But I was like, cool, no, I'm in function mode. This is what I've got to do. We've got to get through, and then we can sort out our feelings once Rylee comes home.
Yeah.
And so we, like, Jess and I really connected in this time with just what was happening. We probably weren't honest with our emotions and our feelings, but we did have this extra little bond and just created this routine of, we probably got to spend more time together than we had in ages, because of this. So it was almost like, well, let's just enjoy it in a way of, we're getting to spend hours together and hours with our child together that, we probably weren't as crickets very full on. So we're trying to enjoy that, but definitely some big P&D for Jess, which she probably didn't seek help for straight away, which she should have, but she ticked all the boxes for that, and they got her in with some appointments that, are few and far in between. And it really exposes the system and how hard it is for people to get help. And it's really sad. I'm super lucky in this sport and where I'm at that they can weasel us in and get us in earlier with access to our own psychs, but the regular public doesn't. And I found that really frustrating that Jess couldn't seek help as quickly as I could, even though she's the one that needs it the most. So we definitely had our emotional struggles in that sense, following that, and didn't really speak about that enough. And probably over the last 12 months, we've really tried to work on that.
At what point did you sort of have, I mean, if you think back to the first discussion that you may have had around, okay, so how are you actually feeling? Like Rylee's well, where, she's all, healthy and all of the good things. How are you? Like, what did that discussion look like? And I ask as well for those parents listening going, look, I feel as though perhaps my partner's not in the best place, or actually I'm not in the best place, but I don't know how to, how to best communicate that. What do you think that could look like?
Yeah, I think we could have done it better, if I'm honest. I don't think there was a flat out, how are you feeling
Yeah.
moment. I think we had picked up on how each other were and went, oh, actually, like, what have your thoughts been the last, month or so? And then that's when we started, we probably rolled backwards rather than going, this is how I'm feeling now. I should have voiced this a long time ago. And if I had my time again, I would ask flat out. And I guess I was probably scared to know the answer. And scared that I wasn't going to know what to say after hearing, yeah, I've been struggling, which I was probably in my own bubble as well. I probably should have noticed she was struggling. I had my moments of really struggling too, but I cover them up very well. And I'd like to think that Jess would have no idea, and that's how I kind of wanted it to be. So, yeah, if I had my time again, I'd probably address the issue more flat out and go, I've noticed, you seem a bit down at the moment. Has this been going on a while? Or how are you feeling? Just as a flat out question. I would definitely be more brave with that. And I guess I probably didn't have the tools to answer that question if she did say yes. And that is a big learning curve that I probably should have dove into pre-pregnancy. We both probably should have. So just being more honest and willing to kind of be vulnerable. And I guess it was such a vulnerable moment for both of us that we both didn't want to be extra vulnerable with each other and just add on added pressure when we both probably knew that we were struggling a little bit. So yeah, I wouldn't say that I can't remember a die-hard conversation of asking it flat out, but we definitely got there eventually and going, been struggling a little while. I think I need to get some help. And that's when we really pushed, I guess, the services.
What resources would you recommend? What worked well for you?
It was actually through the hospital for Jess
Okay.
that we seeked help. So through a local GP, they recommended someone, and she's been seeing that same psych since. So that'd been great for her. I'm actually not sure what I think they specialize in post-pregnancy, so P&D stuff. I think that's what the clinic specializes in, so I assume the psych does too. And for me, I now see a psych who isn't at all related to the hospital. That's through cricket. They've organised that. So I think just being able to search the avenues, but the hospital were definitely good in recognising that. Jess had filled out a few checklists and surveys, and they said, look, you tick all the boxes, we're going to recommend some help. And I think the first 5 sessions are paid for, and then after that it's out of pocket, and that's when we're super lucky to be in a good enough position to be able to pay for those appointments, because your everyday humans probably aren't. And I guess that's been my frustration through it, is knowing that, if my mum went through this with us kids, there's no way in hell they could have afforded that. So the system's a bit broken. I really dislike it. And for how much they show that they care, and they do all these surveys and go, look, you need some help, there's not actually a lot of help there. So I would say to be really well pre-planned, and maybe have some people in mind, or friends of friends that could recommend some people that if you're going to need it, because I guarantee there'll be a lot of people that will.
Yeah, 100%. And I agree with you. It's amazing the limited supply even of psychs and things like that, let alone there could be months waiting lists for certain psychs and things like. It's just crazy to me that, and with mental health being such a massive issue for, particularly after COVID, at which point we pretty much broke the system, I'm sure. Like, it's just, it's crazy that it is quite a privilege to be able to get that support at times. I reached out to the Gidget Foundation, and similarly they have a resource there which is subsidised, which was great up to a certain point, and after that you have to fund it. So there are resources out there. I certainly looked in, so I had postnatal as well, and I also found things like resources like podcasts or YouTube clips, or I don't know, also carving out a bit of time for myself, which I know is very difficult to do with a newborn, but for me to be able to go for a walk for 20 minutes and then come back into the fold really helped me from a mental health mindset. Was there anything else that you did, or that Jess did, that you felt was really beneficial?
I think you mentioned it there, some time for yourself, and I think that is the mum guilt of going, I don't deserve this time for myself. I need to be there for my child. And for a long time, we didn't recognize that, that Jess really needed that. And I didn't recognize it. She didn't, her family didn't, because everyone just thinks, you want to be around your newborn 24/7, and you probably do, but you don't realize that that's not what you need, and that's not what your baby needs too. So eventually we started to get it right a little bit, where I'd come home from training and be like, go walk Eddie, our dog, take as long as you want, that sort of thing. And we probably took too long to get there, because she, as I said, she suffered some real guilt from the pregnancy, and thinking that somehow she had done something wrong, when I know genetically that it was impossible. Like, she could not have done anything differently. She still blamed herself and felt responsible, I guess, for what happened. And even now, with the possibility of a second child, she's like, I really want to make sure I can try and get the 40 weeks this time. And I'm like, well, that's, as we know from the first, that's out of your control. So I think mum guilt is the truest thing. And we both genuinely suffer from that a lot. And I think we didn't recognize that for a long time. And I don't think parents speak about that enough. And even for me on tour, I'm missing a lot of Rylee's life. I know Jess struggles at home, and Rylee still doesn't sleep well, doesn't eat well. She's not an easy child in any sense of the word. So, I think mum guilt is the biggest thing in recognizing and going, actually, no, I need some time for myself to be a human being, not just a mum. And that was probably our biggest shift too, is having family and friends just ask how Rylee is, you know, like how's Bubs, how's this? And you're like, well, has anyone asked how Jess is doing?
Yeah.
And that was probably a shift that I make sure that, you know, our team doctor has just had a little girl, and has just brought her on tour and is beautiful. And everyone's like, how's Phoebe? How's this? And I'm like, well, Pip, like, how are you? Like, no one really asks because everyone is just so excited about the baby and they don't do it intentionally.
Yeah.
But in really realizing that you haven't actually had good conversations with your friends about yourself in a long time. So we tried to probably address that, as well as, you know, giving Jess some time to herself and time to exercise, even just feel like what she did pre-pregnancy. Exercise has been a big one. And obviously post C-section is a big factor in making sure that, you know, you're all healed and stuff. So that was also a struggle for Jess, who's quite active as well. So it's probably just trying to make sure we recognize the factors as they came and remember that we are still humans and parents as well, but we're in a relationship as well, and we probably needed to talk to each other a bit more just regularly, not about Rylee, just life, or do a crossword together, do something that wasn't just Rylee related, as that was its own stress in itself.
Yeah, absolutely. And I speak to so many parents over 100 episodes now of the podcast, and so many common themes come come out from those discussions. And one of them is that I lost myself in all of this. Another one is, and from an identity perspective and everything, because my whole life now is this child, or trying to juggle work and the child. And another one is we sort of lost each other in our relationship because we just put ourselves last because it's all about the baby. So, it's so easy not to carve out the time. You know, I felt I had to put things in the diary to be like, it's going to happen. Like, I'm going for that run, or we've got a date night in 8 weeks' time, but it's coming, something we can look forward to, right? Like, yeah, I mean, how did you guys... how have you juggled your relationship along with, parenthood in general?
Yeah, again, probably not something we've realized till probably the last 6 months, as we weren't juggling it overly well. You kind of think you've got it down pat, and then something pops up and exposes it, and you're like, oh God, have we been neglecting that for that long? And I think as I said, we're super lucky to have Jess's parents around the corner. And I reckon from about a year in, that's when we started going, no, we need date night. Like, we need... at least once a month, we need date night. Yeah. And whether that is booking a night away, that was the hardest part. I think Jess had her first night away from Rylee at about, if she was maybe 1.5, close to that. And like, obviously I'd spent a lot of time away on tour. So for me, it was a night away. And for Jess, it was a very anxious one of going, it's my first night away. And I said, look, we left once she was asleep. We'll probably like be home close to before when she wakes up anyway. So it's okay. And it was just recognizing that we were not putting any time for ourselves. And, you're exhausted and you don't really think about it. And to be honest, once you just put them to bed, you kind of just want to chill. And so you probably don't focus on each other. You just focus on relaxing. And so we were trying to, we wouldn't quite we put date night in the diary. That was one. But trying to make sure we also did other things together. We started obviously doing the walks with Eddie and all that together, making sure that, at least it can be family time, if not just me and Jess time, because that was the hardest to come across. And I think with me and my job, that's probably the hardest part of all, is going, I'm not in control of my schedule. I can't just shift training wherever I want. And so it'd be like, okay, I know we had this date night plan, but they've turned training into a night training, so we're not going to be able to make it. And then trying to reshuffle that was probably the hardest part. But we tried to make sure we did prioritize that. And we're admittedly a lot better with that. And that's probably because Rylee's a little bit older, a little bit easier. Like, we had super bad witching hour with her that would last an hour and a half for like 4 months. Like, she was off the charts bad, and it was more stressful for us to hand her to someone else than it was to just look after ourselves. So for a good chunk of time there, we weren't probably spending any time together or getting any free time, but it was also what was easiest at the time. It was just not worth the stress. So once she got a little bit easy to take care of, we definitely lent on Jess's parents a lot, and we still do for the odd night away or even just dinner together. But we've started trying to make day dates a little bit more. And If I happen to have a rest day, then we would use that to go out and do something, because everything always used to just be at night because it was just easiest. Helen would finish work, Jess's mum would finish work and come and look after Rylee, and we'd get a couple hours at dinner. Whereas like doing something during the day together is actually doing something. It's not just having a meal. It's like we went out and explored and did this cool little, I guess, like picnic scenario thing, and just turning it where we could a day date, which isn't obviously possible for a lot of people, but my schedule was weird, and just trying to find that day is what worked for us. So also just making sure that it doesn't become a chore in a sense of trying to find time, like actually wanting to do it and going, hey, we've gone to this place for dinner the last few times, let's change it up, or even let's not do that, let's do a pottery class or something random, and actually remember to do things together, because that's what you did pre-baby, and I think that has been really refreshing for us. But as I said, that's probably only come in the last 6 months or so.
Yeah, it's so, I feel like the first year is just a bloody shit show, if you ask me. Like, it's survival, right? You know, for the first year. Then the second year, like, okay, whoa, what just happened? We need to recalibrate a bit, learn from 100%. Our lessons, and move forward in a better way. I think that's just, from what I've heard from everyone, it's certainly, the experience. I'd love to know, at what point did Rylee's health sort of, like, what happens with the preemie? So like she goes home, you know, she's healthy, obviously. Are there more checkups? And at what point were you not having to worry about any of that?
We're not at that point yet.
Oh, okay.
So it's actually, I actually really like the system. So any baby really born between, it's different for each hospital, but pretty much born prem, so before 30 weeks, they're going to have a whole list of checkups. So for Rylee, it was extra hearing tests, physical tests, a whole bunch of stuff that they want to look at frequently until they're 2. Okay. So we would be, so as I said, we went home at 36 weeks. We actually went home on the NED program, which is like an early discharge, but she still had the feeding tube through her nose. So we were feeding her through that. But the first night we got home, she pulled out her tube, and we're like, oh, great, here we go. But then she did a suck feed on the bottle, and we're like, oh, okay. So we went back, they put the tube back in. 2 nights later, she pulled it out again, and we're like, cool. But then she did a day of suck feeds, like a whole day. And they were like, if she doesn't suck feed on the next one, maybe come back in. And then she did. And they're like, well, she's just telling you she's ready and she doesn't need the tube anymore. So pretty much once that happened, she was then fully discharged from the NED program, and she was officially home and could stay at home. But we had to pass a few things before that. So you kind of got to prove you're fit to take them home with, you know how to put them in a baby seat, you know how to change a nappy, the basic stuff that is assumed, I guess, but you kind of had to prove. And then after that, it's very frequent visits to, I guess, a pediatrician. So for us, we stayed with our neonatologist in the women's and children's for at least a year. We were with him, and we just monitor Rylee. He's been the person who had seen her since the day she was born, and I guess you actually feel like they have a connection with it. It isn't quite like the proper public system where you chop and change. This is your assigned, doctor, and he was incredible. So we felt a real connection with him, and he knew Rylee very well, and it would be coming in for frequent checkups, to make sure is she reaching her milestones for her corrected age. And we were pretty lucky that most of the time she was ahead of the pack, in the sense that she was pretty close to her actual age than corrected. And that was kind of, I guess, the hardest part was the lingo and making sure we were saying corrected and actual age, because there is, close to 3 months difference there. So regular appointments, and then we started hydrotherapy. They said she's hypermobile, got low muscle tone, so we had to start hydrotherapy. We had seen that she went through a patch and still is terrible with her eating. So we'd see a dietitian, everything else in between. Basically, they tick off all these boxes that I don't think you would if you had a full-term baby, which is pretty cool. Like, it's frustrating and stressful and adds so much more hectic to your schedule because you have appointments at the women's and children's, but you also feel like they're really ticking every box with Rylee and making sure that she is where she should be. So we still have a pediatrician now who's wonderful, and Rylee is a little bit behind in her speech. For her actual age, she's behind for her corrected. She's pretty on par, but we've now seeking help with a speech path and an OT just to make sure everything's ticking along nicely. And there's just more boxes to tick is how I would say. So rather than your 6 monthly appointment with your ped or whatever we'd have that much more regularly. And they double check their hearing and their vision again before they leave. I would say that it's just a lot more boxes to tick before you can, I guess, feel like she's free. And she's technically, now that she's 2, she is discharged from the hospital, so she's no longer in there. And I mean, we were in there just the other day because she broke her leg, so that's great.
Delightful, yeah.
That's just Rylee. And then we were sitting there waiting for the plaster to get put on, and I had a bit of a chuckle, and I was like, Jess, we were in here 4 weeks earlier with a dislocated elbow. I was like, I think we should get a membership here.
No.
Like she's a little nutcase. Like she does not stop. Like an incredibly active little jittery human being, and it is so hard, but I also love it. Like I couldn't think of anything worse than a kid that just sat there and didn't do much. So I think we're going to be visiting the hospital a hell of a lot, even though she's technically discharged.
Oh gosh, keeping you on your toes for sure. To wrap up, I want to know, what advice would you give to parents who are listening who have a high risk pregnancy, or who have a unwell newborn, or who experienced the journey or is going to experience a similar journey to what you guys did? What advice would you give them if they're sitting in that right now?
Take it day by day. I think I struggled with, I was trying to look forward too far and see the future and go, shit, if she's born at 26 weeks, this is what she's going to look like when she's 2. And then I would stage that at every possible thing, because that's, I guess, how we're structured to think, is to plan. Whereas really going, every day we get extra in this pregnancy is a blessing, and celebrate the little milestones. I think, like for us, we were told at 24 weeks that she could come any day from then. And at that point, I think she was a little under 400 grams, and I'd unfortunately done my research in survival rates and all that kind of stuff, and had put panic in my own mind rather than going, actually, we got to 25 weeks today. Like, let's, celebrate that. We got to 26 weeks, we got to 27, 28. And I think we started to do that a little bit more towards the back end of the pregnancy, and it just gives you a bit more of a positive outlook in going, actually, no, we've got this far. Things could be worse. So I think take it day by day absolutely is a must, because it's a long journey, and everyone's NICU and SCABU journey is going to be completely different. And we were super lucky to have a smooth one, but we met obviously lots of families in there that didn't. So just making sure that we weren't taking anything for granted, but we also weren't looking at the worst case possibilities, because there are so many, and you're confronted with that every day at the hospital, that you just need to focus on your own child's journey, and celebrate the small wins. And I think ask questions. For me, as I said, I'm a question asker. I like to know how everything works, what any beeping means on that machine, what that's referring. And that made me calm, and in turn calm Jess. So the monitor would go off and I go, it's okay. She was just screaming, so blood sats gone down, that's fine. And Jess about, okay. And so because I knew, that meant she knew, and then we could just be calm together rather than just getting overwhelmed by the sounds that are in there. Because there's a lot going on. And there's a lot that you don't control and you don't get a lot of say in. And at times you probably don't feel heard by the nurses, but you know that they are doing everything they can. And most of the time, as I said, they're understaffed, overworked, and they're bloody awesome in there. So I think trusting the powers that be, and really just making sure you're focused on your own little situation.
Yeah, I love that. Such good advice. Megan, thank you so much again for your time today.
Thanks, Sandy. Thanks for having me.